This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, I'm Paul Huffman, the Census and Redistricting Coordinator for League of Women Voters of Minnesota. I'm here today with the Tuesday timely topic for April 7th. Today we'll be talking about a quick update on the census and COVID-19, and then redistricting and the People-Powered Fair Maps campaign in Minnesota and where we stand with that. So I appreciate your time taking a look at this and keeping up with where things are. Right now, there's no changes in timeline on the census from what we discussed last week. I was on a call with the Minnesota Census Mobilization Partnership Hub this morning. On that, Andrew Verdon, who's the Census Director for the Minnesota State Demographic Center, as well as the Regional Director for the Census Bureau, and they both, reinforce that, things are on hold from sending the census workers in the field. There's currently no indication of a impact on the date to send census workers in the field at the end of May, although certainly that's going to depend on local conditions and actions needed to preserve the health and safety of both census workers and the public. There are significant wait times on phone responses to the census, reported 40 minutes or longer, especially if you're talking about foreign language applications. So we do encourage folks to be patient and to respond online if that's an option that works for you. If you have other additional questions about that, please reach out to me at phuffman@lwvmn.org. Last Thursday, many of you should have gotten text updates on the census. The State Demographic Center used the list of registered voters in Minnesota and where there were cell phone data to send those texts. I know I got one personally asking about participation in the census and encouraging you to reach out to family and friends to encourage them to participate in the census. This did result in a bump in the census participation for others. Just to show you that, this is the map of Minnesota and the census participation. Shows right here Minnesota at 54.5. We are now top in the country. Wisconsin at 52.4, and then Michigan at 51.8. That light blue is the indicates greater than 51%, with a 45% overall participation. As far as the specific in Minnesota, we can show you Minnesota and then show you by county how we're doing here in Minnesota. And there, if you look at the dark blue, and this is actually changed since yesterday, Scott County at 63% and Carver County at 63.9. So both of those doing well. Rock County, which was doing so well last week, they're not quite as strong as last week. The Rock County's at 60.3%. So again, doing well overall. Overall for Minnesota, we're again leading the way on that. So the other thing you've seen an update from the Minnesota League on potential phone banking opportunities. This is something that the State Demographic Center is working on. Progress is being made. You can reach out through your local leagues if you're interested to let them know. Nick Harper has got the lead working with the Demographic Center on that. And I do want to ask if anybody's got experience with phone banking, experience and expertise, to please reach out to me or Nick, let us know. The Demographic Center is looking for people with experience on that. So moving on to our main topic today, we got the census and then we have redistricting. And this timeline shows you that the census goes through the end of the year, and then that connects closely and integrally with the redistricting. So by the end of the year, what the census director provides to the president is the apportionment count. And We'll talk about that briefly. But that's what gets given to the president from the Census Bureau. It is not all the data, it's not all the numbers, it's what state gets how many representatives. The president then by federal law is required to send that to the House of Representatives shortly after the start of the new session. And then within 2 weeks, the clerk of the House of Representatives is required to send that to the governors. So there's no review, approvals, changes in that process. It just goes straight to through the states through that process. And then if you notice, it says the legislature is required, and this is by the state constitution, to redo the district lines for congressional legislative districts in the 2021 session. And also by law, there's other district lines, school districts, city councils that have to get changed. This talks briefly about what is redistricting and what is reapportionment. And reapportionment is what we talk about with what the Census Bureau does. It says what state has how many districts. It doesn't say how you draw the lines. It just says you have to do that. Then the states are tasked with redrawing the lines, and that is what's called redistricting. So apportionment is what the Census Bureau does through the President and Congress. Redistricting is what the state does. And every state has their own process, and that's become even more diverse here in the last 10 to 15 years as there's been a proliferation of, and actually maybe more like 25 years, but as there's been Supreme Court cases and changes in how it's done on a state-by-state basis. So, going on, there's 3 parts, and I credit Nick Harper with coming up with these terms, but 3 elements. And I found it from my experience in business, this applies to almost any function or process. You've got the people that make up that process. You have the principles, what are the rules or what's the structure, and then the process of that. So for redistricting, there's the people, and we'll talk about another time and what that consists of. And then the principles, what are the rules or criteria? And Nick will talk about this at a later point. And then the process, meetings are held, what are the timeline and things of that nature. So that's what we're really here to talk about today, is those items and how that affects. Now, in Minnesota, there's currently no laws or administrative rules that govern the process. We've got the state constitution, statutes, and administrative rules cover how districts are structured. Basically, we're required to have 67 Senate districts. Each Senate district is divided into 2 House districts in the state. But it doesn't say anything in regards to who meets or what rules are considered, other than there's the what's called contiguity and convenience, and then there's federal law, which we could go on about minorities and minority languages. But really, from a state standpoint, it's really up to the legislature with support from the legislative commission, and the GIS to come up with the data to support it. Then the legislature goes into their meetings and small meetings. It's a very political process to do it. And then they present those to the governor, and then the governor approves or disapproves, vetoes that. So you can see that there's really no opportunity and clarity around who's involved, how this works, and then where's the public's engagement in this? Are we thinking of more than just the political considerations on how to and the strict limited legal requirements for how to do districting in Minnesota? So without that process and without that transparency and those rules up front, it's very easy to see how the redistricting process can be manipulated. And it's all legal, but it's really up to the politicians to do that. Now, Iowa is the gold standard of process, and I'll talk a little bit about, we're talking about what we do have in Minnesota. And what I'll share is, and we've said this previously, is that the way we do redistricting in Minnesota doesn't work for Minnesota. If you go back to the 1960s, when really the rules and the standards changed nationally as a result of several Supreme Court cases to require that states redistricted every 10 years based on the census to reflect changes in population, because frankly, most states hadn't done that prior to 1960. And then then the states, started doing that on a more regular basis. That ever since 1960, there has not been a full congressional and legislative redistricting done without either intervention or having the maps drawn by the courts. So we have some rules through our constitution or laws on doing a redistricting, but in effect, we haven't done it. The legislature and the governor together, because we've had divided government, have not been able to do that, or the courts have stepped in because it's been clearly abusive of some federal law. So here's how it could work. And there's a lot of elements. You talk about the people. The legislature is the one who does it, and the governor approves it. You talk about the criteria, which is very limited in our current laws and rules in Minnesota. And then you talk about the process, which is really very limited for Minnesota. In Iowa, what you can see is that that they have a nonpartisan legislative staff draw the maps. That is not made up of legislators, it's not made up of party members, it's members of the legislative staff. Now, they don't approve the maps, but they do draw the maps. And there's very specific rules in the Iowa state law that governs the timeline, the structure, what gets to be concluded. And so there's a lot of visibility and transparency of the process in Iowa and how to do that. They have, again, very detailed, and this is now then taken out of the state law, and then it's available in a legislative guideline, and anybody can look at. It tells you that timeline. A temporary redistricting advisory committee is formed, which provides oversight and guidance, but they don't draw the lines either. Those people are appointed by the legislative leaders, and there's a chair, but they don't have a vote on what that map is. There's a strict prohibition on use of political election data. They don't look at where the current legislators live. They don't look at past election results. They're prohibited from doing that. There are specific principles, criteria, Iowa calls them standards, about how to do those. And then there's a requirement that the TRAC, the Redistricting Advisory Commission, hold 3 public meetings regionally diverse around Iowa prior to approval. And then there's plans on what to do if the legislature doesn't approve the maps. And finally, there's specifics on the role of the judiciary in this process. So if the governor vetoes the maps, or if the legislature can't reach agreement, now the legislative staff who draws up the maps, every time that it gets disapproved by the legislature, then it goes back to the staff to take into account the reasons for disapproval and to try to do better. So you can see a lot of detail for Iowa. And some of those things that you don't necessarily have to have everything in your process to have a better process than we have right now, because frankly, right now we have almost no process in Minnesota to govern this. So you're looking at our People Power Fair Maps campaign, and we've had just a tremendous response from members and local leagues on our postcards to the legislature. We've had over 1,500 postcards distributed to league members and other groups in order to respond. We've had a number of meetings with local leagues. I'm continuing to do webcasts with local leagues, and I'm continue to be available for that if that's what you want to do. We are taking a pause on our direct advocacy of the People Power Fair maps, either through letters to the editor or through the postcarding. With this time of the coronavirus and COVID-19 sheltering, that is really not the most pressing thing on people's minds or on legislators' minds. So we think it's appropriate to take a pause, focus on what's most important today, and then review our strategies going forward for the rest of the year in 2021. We will re-engage on this when the legislature comes back into session. We want to make sure we have the right talking points to focus on that. And we want to look ahead to 2021 and how we engage the governor and the public in the redistricting process yet to come. So stay tuned for that. Please keep your energy level up, be ready, be thinking, send emails to me and Nick if you're interested or if you have other ideas or thoughts. So there's that. So that concludes the discussion today. Again, if you have questions or suggestions, please email me, Paul Huffman, at phuffman@lwvmn.org. And I hope everyone is doing well, staying healthy, and thinking about our democracy and empowering voters. Next week's topic will be elections and COVID-19. Nick Harper will be on with the primary in Wisconsin and all the the turmoil and chaos surrounding that and the legal issues and the Supreme Court weighing in last night on how that was going to work. I'm sure a lot of people have concerns. Nick will help allay those concerns, share some of what he's doing and what the league is doing and what our state is doing, including the Secretary of State's office and others, to ensure that our elections go off as intended and our democracy is protected and supported. So thank you again, and we'll talk to you next week.